History has already made up its mind about the Hound. Deserter, coward.
Fuck the king.
The dog who ran from his king when the fires came and the walls shook and the whole world was burning. That's the verdict, and it's followed Sandor Clegane's name ever since. But there's a problem buried in that word. Deserter. Because to desert something, you have to owe it. You have to be free to stay and choose to leave. And almost nobody asks the one dangerous question about that night. What if Sandor Clegane never had that choice at all? What if he didn't abandon his king? What if, after an entire lifetime, he finally got away from him?
You're on the wrong side of the war.
I lost half of my men. The Blackwater's on fire.
This isn't the story of a man who ran. It's the story of a man who escaped. And to understand what he was escaping, you have to understand what he was, long before that night, before he ever wore a white cloak. You have to start with 3 dead dogs. Look closely at the banner Sandor Clegane was born under, and you won't find a lion or a wolf or a dragon. You'll find 3 black dogs on yellow. In George R.R. Martin's books, there's a story behind them, and it tells you everything about the family that made him. Generations ago, a great lord of House Lannister, a lion, was out hunting when a lioness turned on him and nearly tore him apart. And it was the Clegane hounds who threw themselves at her. 3 of those dogs died in the yellow autumn grass, buying their master's life with their own. As a reward, the family was handed land, a keep, a name that finally meant something. And in exchange, forever after, the Cleganes belonged to the lions. Sit with that for a second. Before Sandor was born, before he could walk or speak or choose a single thing about his own life, his bloodline had already been bought and paid for. His family's entire worth, stitched right there on the banner, came down to one idea. We are the dogs who die for lions. He didn't grow up dreaming of glory. He grew up understanding his place. You serve, you obey, and when the lion needs you bleed, and you don't ask why. So when the world started calling him a dog, it was never just an insult. It was the truth of his whole existence, and the people who owned him knew it, and they used it. That one word, dog, became the leash around his neck. When Joffrey Baratheon wanted to remind the room who held the collar, he didn't call him Sandor, he called him Dog. In front of lords, in front of ladies, a preening prince would turn to the single most dangerous man in the castle and speak to him the way you'd speak to an animal at your feet. Fetch, guard, kill. And the animal would answer. The name did the work a chain does. It told him what he was, every day, until he stopped arguing with it. He even swallowed it and made it his own. The Hound. If they were going to call him a dog, he'd be the most terrifying dog Westeros had ever seen. It was armor. It was surrender dressed up as pride. But a collar only works as long as the dog keeps obeying. And here's the part of his story the people who cheer for him would rather skip past. Because being a good dog cost Sandor Clegane something he could never, ever take back. Go back to the very beginning, to a riverbank called the Trident. There's a butcher's boy named Micah, a child, unarmed, nobody important, playing its swords with a stick alongside Arya Stark. Prince Joffrey decides to have his cruel fun with them, it spirals out of his control, and the Golden Prince ends up humiliated, wounded, his royal pride bleeding in the mud in front of a girl. Someone has to answer for that. Not a knight, not a soldier, a child. And when blood is demanded, it's the Hound who rides out to collect it. Micah runs. He isn't fast, and Sandor Clegane cuts a terrified, unarmed little boy down and carries the body back slung over his saddle like meat from a hunt. No hesitation anyone can see, no mercy offered. Just a dog doing exactly what the lions required of him. And later, When he's forced to answer for what he did, he doesn't weep and he doesn't make excuses. He says it flat and plain. The boy attacked a prince, and it wasn't his place to question princes. That's the entire defense. That's the whole cage in a single sentence. A dog doesn't get to decide which orders are monstrous. A dog doesn't get to say no. He was handed a child's life and told to end it, and the thing that had been bred into his blood since before he drew breath answered for him. That is what obedience looks like when it's total. And that boy is the weight Sandor carries, silently, unspoken, underneath everything that comes after. Now here's the contradiction that makes him so much more than a brute, and it's the crack that eventually breaks the whole thing open. He hated them. He hated the very people he was sworn to die for. Listen to how he speaks to Joffrey when the boy plays at being a soldier. The dead voice, the contempt he barely bothers to hide, the way he'll quietly take a weaker child's side against the Golden Prince and dare anyone to say a word. Sandor looked at the king he served and saw precisely what Joffrey was. A coward, a bully, a small, cruel boy wearing a crown far too big for his head. And he obeyed him anyway, every single day, because that's the real horror of the leash. It doesn't need you to respect your master. It doesn't need you to believe in him. It only needs you to heal. And beneath all of it, the dog had a heart no one was ever supposed to see. When Joffrey has Sansa Stark beaten and stripped and shamed in front of his own court, it's Sandor who steps in, who covers her, who tries to soften the cruelty without ever openly crossing his king. When a mob swarms her in the streets and hands are already dragging her down to do unspeakable things to her, it's the Hound who carves a path through them and pulls her out and carries her back alive. He saves her, and when she tries to thank him, he can barely stand to hear the words. In the books, he tells her he'd rather be an honest dog than a lying knight, that a hound will die for you, but never lie to you. He says it like it's the one true thing left in him, but it isn't true at all, because he lies constantly, to Joffrey, to the Queen, bending the truth again and again to keep this one girl safe. The loyal, brutal, simple dog was a mask, and the man wearing it had already started breaking the one rule his entire bloodline was built on. He was beginning to care about something more than obeying, and that quiet rebellion was heading straight for the one night that would put it to the test, the night everyone remembers wrong. Because to understand why he walked away from his king, you first have to see that moment for what it actually was. Not a retreat, a jailbreak. The Battle of the Blackwater. Stannis Baratheon's army is at the gates, the city is screaming, and yes, for one moment, the river itself erupts in green fire, and something inside Sandor buckles. That's all the fire gets here, because the fire was never the point. The point is what he does next. He pulls back inside the walls, shaken, and the machine he's served his whole life instantly tries to wind him back up. Fight. Get back out there. Obey. And standing right in front of him is Joffrey, the boy king, the master. The same small, cruel voice that once sent him to run down a child by a river. His dog is expected to heal, the way he always has, the way his family always has, all the way back to 3 dead hounds in the yellow grass. And for the first time in his entire life, the dog doesn't. Watch that moment closely, because it isn't panic. It's a man finally hearing a command and realizing, deep in his bones, that he does not have to follow it. Everything he is has been quietly building to this. The contempt, the hidden heart, the child's death he never wanted. All those years of healing for people he despised. It collapses into one single breaking point, and he says the words that end his old life. Fuck the Kingsguard. Fuck the city. Fuck the king. That is not a soldier fleeing a fight. Read it again. That is a dog looking his master dead in the eye and refusing the leash. In George R.R. Martin's books, he says it even simpler later. Even a dog gets tired of being kicked. And then he walks. Out of the throne room, out of the Kingsguard, out of the only life he has ever had. He doesn't loot the castle on the way. He doesn't take gold or glory or anything that belonged to the lions. He takes nothing of theirs, because the entire point is that he is done being theirs. He leaves the way a man leaves a cage, empty hands, and nothing behind him worth keeping. So call him a deserter if that's the word you want, but it only makes sense if he owed them his loyalty to begin with, and he never did. You can't desert a cage, you escape it. Everything the world saw as betrayal that night was actually the first free choice Sandor Clegane ever made in his life. For one moment, the dog who was bred to die for lions reached up and took back the single thing a dog is never allowed to hold, the right to say no. And the second you see it that way, his whole story cracks wide open. Remember Micah, the child he ran down because a prince commanded it, because it wasn't his place to question? Now look at what he becomes the moment he's free. He falls in with Arya Stark, another Stark girl, another child the world wants dead. And this time, nobody owns him, nobody's barking orders, and he chooses to protect her anyway. He drags her across a burning country, keeps her fed, keeps her breathing, becomes the closest thing to a father that furious little girl has left in the world. The man who once killed a child for his master spends his freedom guarding one, for no reason but his own choosing. That is not the same man. That's a man who finally got to decide who he would bleed for, and it carries him all the way to the end, when he walks back toward his monstrous brother through a city drowning in fire. He doesn't go because a lion sent him. He goes because he wants to. A free man, settling his own score, on his own terms. Not a dog on anyone's chain. That's why the label never fit him. He wasn't the coward who deserted his king. He was the prisoner who finally escaped his master. And if you had asked him, that night, what he truly was, he wouldn't have said soldier, or traitor, or even hound. In the books, he leaves us the answer himself, in 5 bitter words that hold his entire life inside them. What's a dog to do with lions? Nothing. A dog has nothing to do with lions. And the day Sandor Clegane finally understood that was the day he stopped being theirs. So the next time you hear someone call the Hound a coward who abandoned his king, you'll know exactly what they're missing. He didn't break a bond that night. He broke a chain. The betrayal everyone remembers was really the first honest, human thing a bought man ever did for himself. So tell me down in the comments, that night at the Blackwater, was Sandor Clegane a traitor to his king, or a free man for the very first time in his life? I genuinely want to know where you land on this one. And if you think the leash was the cruelest thing ever fastened on him, you don't yet know the real story of the brother who made him, the man who turned a frightened little boy into a dog in the first place, and why their war could only ever end one way. That story is darker than anything the Crown ever did to him, and it's coming next.